Netflix's Titans, where it went wrong and what it should have been. The first season for this show wrapped up recently, and I wasn't really conflicted with how I felt, because the way I felt about this show by the end of the first season is the same exact way that I felt about it before the show even aired its first episode, and that it's a terrible live-action reimagining of the Teen Titans. And there are some glaring blunders that this show made, things that could have easily have been fixed. Unfortunately, they weren't fixed, and the show's producers clearly didn't know what the hell they were doing. So I'm quickly going to go through all the major problems that this show had, and how they should have been rectified, which would have made the overall product far better than it turned out to be. So I'm going to start with the characters. And the characters for this TV show aren't likable, for one. There's a lot of inconsistency between this show and the comic book interpretations of these characters, with the exception of one, and I'll get to who that is later. I'm going to start off with Brenton Thwaites as Dick Grayson / Robin. So first of all, this wasn't a bad casting choice. I've seen Brenton Thwaites in other films. I saw him in The Giver. I saw him in the 5th Pirates of the Caribbean film. I saw him in The Signal. And he's not a bad actor. And not only that, but he has the height and the physique of Robin. He has a leading man persona. And I can see why he was cast. The problem with Dick Grayson in this show is that he has a homicidal agenda, which the character isn't known for that. Dick Grayson was trained by Batman, and Batman has a code, and that code is not to kill. Seriously maim and injure, sure, but not kill, not straight up murder. Dick Grayson clearly takes a few guys out in this show permanently. So there's a disconnect between this live action version of the character and the character that everyone knows from the comics. That's an example of the show's producers not really knowing who their audience is. And there's plenty more examples of that in this show. Now, for the most part, outside of Robin's action sequences, I didn't think Dick Grayson was that bad of a character. They went into his backstory, which is very reminiscent of his original comic book origins. It actually wasn't bad. There was a struggle that he was dealing with in the show, that the show did explore to some degree. The even bigger issue is what they did with the supporting cast, which left a lot to be desired. So I'm going to start off with Beast Boy, portrayed by Ryan Potter. Beast Boy was the best character on this show. Ryan Potter really nailed the portrayal of Beast Boy, whom I felt his interpretation of the character was very similar to what you found in the Teen Titans cartoon show, the original show, The Good Show. For the most part, he was very optimistic and lighthearted, and he really nailed the personality of Beast Boy. Now, the problem with Beast Boy in this show isn't the actor who's portraying him, nor necessarily the way the character is written, but just the way some of Beast Boy's scenes are set up in this show wasn't utilized properly, and his powers definitely was not utilized properly either. He only turns into one specific animal in this show, and that's the tiger, the green tiger, that you only see maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the entire season. Whereas if you compare that to the animated version of the character, Beast Boy turned into all kinds of different animals throughout Teen Titans 2003. Even in the first season of that show alone, the show really captured Beast Boy's powers in a very unique way, whereas this show only has him transform less than a handful of times throughout the entire runtime of the season. And then they tried to make it realistic where he has to take off his clothes before he transforms, otherwise when he transforms back, he reverts back to his human form, he doesn't have his clothes. And that just really kills the momentum of any action scene that they want to place Beast Boy in, because he has to do all that first before he's ready to fight. Beast Boy was always going to be an expensive character to put on screen for live action, but if they didn't have the budget to do the character, then they shouldn't have bothered trying to do a show based off the Teen Titans. Because in order to do a Teen Titans show, you need Beast Boy. And if you don't have the money to do Beast Boy, then there's no show. And that leads me into a character that wasn't in the show that a lot of people wanted to see, including myself, and that's Cyborg, who was one of the more popular characters off of the Teen Titans 2003 show. Many have speculated that because Cyborg appeared in the live-action Justice League movie, that they couldn't get the rights for him to be in the show. But that's nonsense. There's ways that they could have gone about to put him in the show. And if they couldn't get him in the show, then once again, the show shouldn't have been made. Even with the CW show with Supergirl, they got Superman to appear in that show as a separate version of that character compared to the Henry Cavill version for the DCEU. And both of those characters for a time existed in two separate continuities at the same time. And the same could have been done with Cyborg. Instead of getting Cyborg, we got these two characters, Hawk and Dove. And I'll get to those two characters later. Aside from Beast Boy, the two major characters on the show that the story really revolves around the most is Raven, who seems to be the central leading character in the show, and Starfire. And the live-action version of these two characters were handled very poorly, to the point where they became a joke, especially if you compare them to, once again, animated Starfire and animated Raven from the 2003 Teen Titans show. So I'm going to start with Raven. So in this show, Raven has two essential issues with her character. The first issue is misrepresentation, because if you compare this version of this character to the version from the comics, or the version from the DC animated movies, or the version from the original Teen Titans show, this character is, by comparison, far more frail compared to pretty much any other version of Raven. Now, Raven is a character that has a lot of doubts. That's the reason why she has a personality that's self-contained and she likes to keep to herself. The live-action version of Raven is too trusting, and she comes off as very naive. And there is no sense of self-control, because her character was written as someone who doesn't know who she is. In the other versions of Raven from other media, the character knows who she is, and that's why she behaves the way she does. So they failed to get the essence of the character right. And the other major issue with Raven in this show is Tegan Croft, the actress who was hired to portray Raven for this series. Her babyface aesthetic really clashes with the version of the character that everyone knows from other forms of media, and she was horribly miscast in this role. Not to mention, Raven's powers in this show are not like the powers that she has from the comics or from the Teen Titans show or from the DC animated films. Her powers come in the form of this evil side of her, which when antagonized, or when Raven just loses control of her emotions, allows her to create some kind of black mist, I guess is the best way I can explain it. And then she can just pretty much destroy anything that's around her. And she has some kind of healing capabilities as well. Whereas the Raven in other forms of media, as well as the comic books, is someone who can use telekinetic abilities. So this version of Raven certainly wasn't the character that everyone expected her to be. And then you have Starfire. And Starfire in this show is the worst character on the show. Starting off, the character is depicted as someone who crash landed on Earth and lost her memory, which sounds like Starfire so far. But her mission is to hunt down and kill Raven, because Raven is set to bring about the end of the world due to her origins. And that premise alone doesn't make any sense. Why would Starfire have been sent to Earth from her home planet to kill one person who has nothing to do with her home world? That, and the fact that the character is in a state of amnesia throughout most of the season, makes her entire arc just boring. Then there was the way Starfire was portrayed visually. The character is usually wearing some kind of night dress, is the nicest way I can put it, with a fur coat and these long thigh leggings, as well as a very cheap wig that looks nothing like Starfire's usual hairstyles in any of her other interpretations. And this is another example of the producers of the show not understanding their audience and truly underestimating how popular the character actually is. But the worst thing they did is that they decided to race bend Starfire's character, and they hired actress Anna Diop, an African-American actress, to portray Starfire. And they hired a dark-skinned actress at that. And of course, this gave fuel to the racist fans in the community to attack the actress on social media, and it created a lot of negative publicity for the show when it could have easily have been avoided. And the actress herself, I think, is actually fairly beautiful. She's attractive, but she's not Starfire. Now, Starfire is a difficult character to cast, but in my humble opinion, they should have cast actress Karen Gillan, a redhead Scottish actress who's found a lot of success, including mainstream success, in the film industry, in both the mediums of television and film. Not only does Karen Gillan look like she could actually portray Starfire, but she actually has the talent to bring the character to life in a live-action setting. Not only that, but it would have made sense to cast Karen Gillan as Starfire, especially considering that she's worked with Brenton Thwaites before in Mike Flanagan's 2014 horror film Oculus, which I felt was a very underrated movie. And in that film, Brenton Thwaites and Karen Gillan portrayed siblings. They were brother and sister. And there was a chemistry there on screen. And that chemistry, I think, would have served this show well had they taken advantage of the opportunity. But they didn't. And of course, last but not least, you have some of the supporting characters like the other Robin, and the two forgettable supporting superhero characters that no one cares about, neither of which had an interesting backstory, and only served to waste the audience's time. So the main cast had huge glaring issues, and the tone of the show was way too edgy and try-hard. And then the story of the show wasn't very good either, because most of it revolved around Raven, whose character was already handled very poorly, as I already explained. And the fact that the show ends on a nonsensical cliffhanger makes it even worse than what it already was. And these are just a few of the many issues that this show has. There were many other poor choices made on this show, such as retconning Batman's character to where he kills, to there really only being one action sequence where all of the Titans are together on screen at once, to the strange extended scenes that felt like it wasn't even a comic book show, let alone a show about the Teen Titans. As I stated before, a lot of the issues with this show could have easily have been fixed if the producers of the show just paid attention to the fans and really took a hard look at the source material. Clearly, they didn't take a look at the source material in any profound way. They just took the basis of the characters, such as their names and basic origins, and they just decided to randomly drop them into a plot that, quite frankly, is uninteresting and has no momentum. And because this is a DC property, which DC hasn't been doing well in either the TV or the movie industry, because this is a DC property, all it does is hurt the brand. And regarding the future of this show, I don't see this having much of a future on Netflix. I see this going the same way as the Marvel Netflix shows. And it'll be a miracle if this show receives a second season. And even if it does receive a second season, the damage pretty much has already been done. And there's not much that they can do to fix this show. The actors have already been hired, the tone has already been set, and the opportunity has already come and gone. This should have been a great comeback for Teen Titans, which hasn't had any good entertainment properties, with the exception of the Injustice video games, since the 2003 cartoon show ended. Instead, what we got was one of the worst interpretations of the Teen Titans, and once again, no hope for the future of DC properties in television.